When it comes to developing new habits, one of the hardest things is actually maintaining your habits consistently and into the long term. Today I want to share my top 9 tips for how I hardwire my habits into both my mind and my routine. So grab your cup of tea and let's dive into it. Tip number 1 is to start tiny. This is a concept that BJ Fogg popularized in his book Tiny Habits. He said, "While small might not be sexy, it is successful and sustainable when it comes to most life changes that people want to make. Big moves, bold moves actually don't work as well as small, stealthy ones." So for example, if you want to develop a reading habit, you might start with simply reading 1 page a day. If you want to make sure that you are flossing your teeth regularly, he suggests starting with flossing 1 tooth. The idea of starting tiny is so that you can focus on creating the habit and also leave yourself wanting more so that you can develop this over time. He says to focus on 2 key areas. Focus on your ability in relation to the habit and to focus on a prompt. And this idea of a prompt also reminds me of a really popular book in the habit space called Atomic Habits by James Clear, where he talks about this idea of habit stacking and that having a prompt allows you to know when it is that you engage in that particular behavior. You can put those 2 habits together and then it becomes easier for you to be able to consistently engage in that habit. For example, when you sit down at your desk in the morning and you open up your computer, what is the first thing that you would do as a part of that process? For example, when you finish up at the end of the day, when you close down your computer or your laptop, what is the next thing that you would do immediately after that? As I've mentioned on this channel, I try and make that my transition prompt into practicing the piano and reminding myself that when I do shut down my computer, that is the time that I move straight into that before I can get distracted by other things. And this conversation about prompts leads me into tip number 2, which is to schedule your desired habit into your routine. That way, when the prompt of a particular time comes up or you get an alert about a particular time, then your habit is already built into your routine. That is the prompt that you are stacking your habit against. I personally find it most effective to, as much as possible, have the scheduled time or the prompt be the same every day. Maybe it's every weekday, but where possible, where you need to be flexible in your routine, maybe you have something on in a particular morning or in a particular evening, maybe you have a hobby or a sport that you already engage with and you know already that you can't actually do that particular habit at that time, maybe it's related to social things as well, then instead of committing to that particular habit and then sort of falling off on those particular days, actually build what that alternative schedule will be. Work around your existing schedule to say, okay, I am actually not going to be able to do that particular thing on that particular day because it's just not feasible for me to have that habit be something that I can do every day, and then schedule an alternative to that. Maybe on that particular day, it's your skip day. Maybe you schedule a different time when you know there is a conflict in that. And the focus on time is what leads me into my next tip, tip number 3, which is to opt for the optimal time. This is something that I became a lot more interested in the last year, to think about when the best time was to do certain things. As I've said in previous episodes, I am very much a morning person, and I find that the most success that I have had with my habits comes from when I schedule that into my morning routine. And for me, I feel like I am at my peak performance at that time, but I also find that that is the most amount of time that I can spend on doing things for myself before my day tends to become about other people, other priorities, and unexpected things that might have come up. I've also talked about on this channel recently as well this idea of larks versus owls. This relates to the science that tells us that not everyone is a morning person. So we don't all need to try and be part of the 5 a.m. club. Just because something like that works for me, it doesn't mean that it is going to work for everyone, because everyone has different body clocks. And the idea of people being larks or owls relates to their natural circadian rhythm and their natural body clocks. It tells us that some people are morning people. They have peak performance in the morning, while other people tend to have peak performance later in the day. An owl, for example, has peak performance in the evening and into the night. So try and think about what one you might be and schedule your habits to relate to that. In the last year, I also pinned a body clock onto one of the boards on my Pinterest, and I referred to specifically what certain hours were ideal to do certain things. Now, this is a generic body clock, so it's worth taking this into account as being maybe a guide as opposed to being the ideal. So maybe once you have had a look at that and you've seen the different times, you can experiment with what works for you. For example, I found that on the body clock that I had found, that 10 o'clock was said to be a really good time to have a tension, and that 2 o'clock, for example, was a good time for your coordination. So I would schedule the activities that I was working on to relate to those things, but I've adjusted that as I've gone along, paying attention to my body clock and what I think actually works best for me, but still keeping the concept of your body clock in mind. So now you have picked a optimal time for you to execute on your desired habits. Now you have to pick a place. This was a concept that really stood out to me in Stephen Pressfield's book, Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Is. He talks about this concept of resistance, that being resistance with a capital R. See it as this character that shows up and is something that keeps you from achieving what it is that you want to. It keeps you from your desired goals, your desired habits. And resistance can come in many forms. It can come in the form of procrastination, in the form of self-sabotage or self-doubt. But by putting yourself, your physical body, into a physical location, it can help you to overcome that resistance that you might feel towards actually executing on your desired habits. And one of the things that Stephen Pressfield talks about, which I find really interesting in this as well, is that when you pick a particular place, then he describes the muses or the inspiration as being able to meet you where you are, showing up in the place that it knows that you are going to be. So I think there is really something to your body recognizing and your mind recognizing what that location means and what it means for your habit and executing on that particular thing. In the book, Stephen Pressfield says, magic happens when you put your ass in the same space with other dreamers who have already put their asses there. My tip number 5 to hardwire your habits into your mind and into your routine is to group like tasks together. By that I mean to consider the left brain and the right brain that you have and the optimal tasks for those particular things. To simplify your left brain and your right brain as much as possible, your left brain is related to more logical, more orderly tasks, while your right brain is related to more creative, more imaginative tasks. So group the tasks in your diary, time block your tasks to group similar tasks together. And then by doing this and perhaps even allowing for a break between shifts into different sides of your brain, it allows you to ease that movement. It allows your brain to get more focused on that particular type of task, get more focused on that technical task, for example, before you move into something that requires you to have more imaginative thinking, or vice versa, whatever works for you. But keep those tasks together so that you ease that movement and you ease that strain on your brain in operating in the different sides. Tip number 6 to hardwire your habit into your mind and into your routine is to put your habit into your plans. By this I mean don't just schedule it into your diary, but to actually schedule it into your bigger plans. Something that I talk about a lot on this channel is the idea of a 12-week year, and that being a way to allow you to maintain your motivation across an entire year instead of just feeling extra motivated at the start of a new year or a new season or in a particular period of your life. It's a way to maximize the motivation and the urgency that you feel towards particular things across an entire calendar year just by reframing your concept of time. And I've learned to not underestimate the importance of putting my habits into a plan. Really, your habits are going to often be a reverse engineer of a bigger goal that you have for yourself professionally and personally. They usually are the daily thing that you need to do to be that person that you see yourself wanting to be in that future. So they relate to a bigger plan anyway. And don't underestimate the importance of writing down your goals and your plans, and your habits are a part of that. There was research from Harvard University that followed the experience of students in the business school, and they asked students if they had goals, if they had written those goals down. And what they found was that the students who had written goals supported by plans in those areas after 10 years had an average of 10x the income as their counterparts who didn't have written goals. So make sure that when it comes to the habits that you want to establish going forward, that you aren't just thinking about them in your mind, that you actually put them to paper or write them down on your computer, on your laptop, and make sure that they are actually something that you are including in your plans and you're building that into a bigger personal development piece for yourself. My tip number 7 to hardwire your habit into your routines and into your mind is to use visualization. This is something that I have become a lot more conscious of in the last couple of years. I've always been someone to write down a lot of my goals and habits that I wanted to have, but I wasn't as much one to explore this concept of visualization. But I started to learn more about the importance of visualization and how much it is used by top performers across a lot of different industries. One of the main benefits of visualization is that it tells your brain what it is that you want it to focus on. So one of the ways that I build this into my routine is using Pinterest. I shared in a previous episode how I have various different boards that relate to my goals that I am trying to achieve, and some of those are related to habits that I want to have. So you might also create a mood board or a vision board that is related specifically to the habit that you are trying to establish for yourself. I also shared in a previous episode some of the common mistakes that are made when it comes to vision boarding. And one of those in particular is not being specific enough. So if you are putting a visualization related to a habit that you want to have on your vision board, or if you are creating any sort of other visualization for yourself relating to your habit, try and be as specific as possible. Just some of what I do in my Pinterest subboards is that I try and break down that habit into the more specific aspects of that habit. For example, while a lot of those subboards that I have on Pinterest are primarily more of a mood board, they're more about an aesthetic appeal, a lot of them are specific enough that it is actually also a little miniature goal, a little miniature habit that I want to have as well. For example, if I have a board that is related to yoga, which I do, I put on that board specific yoga poses that I would love to be able to learn. And so that is a way to develop my habit in a more detailed way that relates to both vision boarding and mood boarding. Then what I do is I build this visualization into my routine. So as much as possible, I try and make sure that I give myself a couple of minutes to scroll particular boards. I even have boards relating to just text quotes, and this keeps me motivated in a particular area because I know what it is that I am trying to achieve in that space. So I allow myself to make time for my vision board, which is the desktop on my laptop, and also to scroll Pinterest as well as a part of my daily routine. So it just adds a visual element to those habit goals that I have too. So we're really starting to get into how you make your habit goals more of a multi-dimensional strategy for your personal or professional development. And that leads me into tip number 8, which is to speak like you already have the habit. And there are a couple of ways that I have found doing this particularly useful. One of the first ways is that when I am writing down anything related to my habit, I use present tense. This is a really common technique in neurolinguistics programming, NLP, that I like to use. So you speak as though you already have that thing, not that it is something that you hope to have in the future. And this also relates back to a book that I have referenced a lot recently, and that is Joe Dispenza's book on breaking the habit of being yourself. And he talks about this idea of the potentiality that exists in another field and you tapping into that potentiality so that it can meet you in your physical field where you are. So having those energies match and speaking things in the present tense, for example, is really important for you to be able to tap into that potential that you have for yourself. And something that I have started doing recently is this concept called morning pages, which you may have heard of. This was an idea that was popularized in The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, where she suggested every day sitting down in the morning and writing 3 pages of your thoughts. So actually physically writing them down and filling up 3 pages of anything that comes to your mind. It's meant to be an opportunity for you to tap into your stream of subconscious thoughts and actually be able to unlock a bit of your creative potential, or maybe any breakthroughs that could potentially be lying underneath the surface of your normal day-to-day activities. I used to have traditional diaries and I always struggled to maintain this habit. It wasn't something that I felt like doing necessarily every day, and I would sometimes find it to be a little bit difficult to sit down and think about what the thing was that I wanted to write. Or alternatively, I would find that I was always writing when there was only a really sort of driving topic that made me want to write that journal entry. But with morning pages, what I love about it is that it is just your thoughts. It's just anything that comes to you. So you might even just be writing that you think this is a silly exercise, that you're not thinking about anything. You might have some really positive thoughts. You might have negative thoughts. You might be full of ideas on some days. Other days you might be completely blank on some things, but you're constantly tapping into what your brain might be telling you. And one of the things that I have found really useful when I do these morning pages, which by the way I actually do in a different way. I don't love the idea of hand writing 3 pages first thing in the morning, so I've tried to adapt my own sort of modern version on this classic book, and I have started to do 1 page on my laptop, which for me kind of works out to be what I've assumed is the equivalent of 3 pages. But one of the things that I have done, particularly when I can't think of any sort of new thoughts in that space, is to integrate things like a present tense affirmation into my writing. So that is an opportunity to really be reiterating into your brain that habit that you want to have. Act like you already have it, speak like you already have it, and use that opportunity to potentially habit stack on something else that you might already have in your routine and speak that habit into your present tense as much as possible. And my tip number 9 to help you hardwire your habits into your mind and into your routine is to keep your commitment with yourself. Now, remember, this idea of resistance is able to wear many guises. Have you ever had a big thing that you needed to achieve on a particular day, or maybe a habit that you wanted to make sure that you executed on, but felt a slight sense of relief when something else potentially came up that seemed more important, more urgent, that meant that you couldn't actually do that thing? I've started to think about that more and realize that when that happens and that potential sense of relief that I might be feeling is probably resistance in disguise. So, what I have tried to do more recently is really distinguish between what is urgent and what is important. Sometimes things that seem really urgent aren't actually what is important. So, I really try as much as possible to honor the commitment that I have made to myself in my routine relating to particular habits or goals that I have, as though I am honoring a meeting that I have scheduled with someone else. And I try at every opportunity to craft my schedule around the way that I have determined that that habit can fit into my routine. Yes, life happens, and there is always going to be times where that is not always possible, but as much as possible, if that is the case, I try and make sure that I reschedule that particular thing for as soon as possible, or I really make sure that while there is a potential gap in my chain of doing that habit, that at my next opportunity, I don't think about as much of me falling off on that particular habit, but I focus on how I can get back on as soon as possible. You might also find the episodes that I have shared previously on habits that could be potentially keeping you stuck useful. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next episode.